For the North, or the Union as we'll call them, when Lincoln is inaugurated in March, Congress is not in session. And just like we have times when school is in session and when it's not, Congress is the same. Lincoln's had sort of this total unilateral power for 3 months, which means he can do quite a number of things, but he cannot declare war. That does require Congress. But he can start preparing. He calls up over 75,000 volunteers, but that's not going to be a huge help because in general, the military isn't all that well prepared. Their only major general is Winfield Scott. His nickname was Old Fluff and Feathers. He actually was alive and fought in the War of 1812, so he is just on the edge of retirement. But he works with Lincoln to come up with the Anaconda Plan. And the plan with this would be to have sort of 3 parts: to blockade the South, so economically it would be very difficult, to try and cut off all supplies, to take control of the Mississippi, which would be another part of cutting off those supplies, and then also to then separate those 2 parts of the Confederacy, so sort of to divide and conquer. The question still is, though, is this war about slavery or is it about maintaining the Union? Some people truly see it as the issue of slavery, but Lincoln probably would have said it is still about maintaining the Union. The Confederates, or the South, they don't have an official army, so this is one of the major problems of a confederacy. They have very few military supplies, but they do have the best military commanders. And there's probably a few reasons for this. One is the South just has a horse culture, and so that's going to lend itself to sort of the elitism of the cavalry units. There were also, in general, a family tradition. If your father served in the military, you would serve in the military. If your father went to West Point, you would go to West Point. And so we have all of these military thinkers who are from the South and who end up staying with the South. That doesn't mean that the soldiers themselves are that much better, the infantry or the privates, but the commanders, the generals, the majors and all that, they were definitely some of the best military strategists. They also had excellent facial hair, as we have discussed. In addition to lacking military supplies, economically, the South is at a disadvantage because they had really relied on agricultural industry. They don't have factories like the North. And so they're going to have to get their butts in gear, start building new factories to try and catch up with the North. But this is what the North has been doing. And some of the figures that are absolutely startling is that when the South could produce, when one factory could produce 100 guns a day in the South, a similar factory in the North could produce about 3,200 guns. In terms of actual tactics, the South is going to be focusing on defense. They feel that they are the ones who are the injured parties, that it will have to be the Union that brings the fight to them, and they're going to be defending their home. So in that sense, they have an advantage. They are trying to maintain and protect what they see as their unique way of life. Now, while they believe that they are a separate country, they do want recognition. We've talked about this issue before, that to be recognized gives you legitimacy. In particular, they would like to get recognition from Britain. The issue with this, now we know that Queen Victoria was, she was taken by the plight of the slaves. There are many reports that she really enjoyed the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. And she sort of probably wanted to recognize the Confederacy, but didn't want to jeopardize the trade relationship she had with the North. So Britain recognizes the Confederacy as a rebel state, so not quite an independent country, but certainly still not part of the Union. Before we get into talking about the battles of the Civil War, it is important to understand that sometimes you will see several names for the same battle. One of the names will probably be related to some sort of territorial or geographic term, whether it is a hill, a field, or a creek or river. Other names of the same battle will be more related to towns or railroad junctions. The South tends to call battles by their geographic terms. The North tends to call them by their sort of economic or more civilized terms, I guess. The first major battle of this war takes place at Bull Run, or Manassas. It's about 25 miles outside of Washington, D.C. This takes place in July of 1861. Because of its location rather close to Washington, there are actually quite a number of people who ride out, bring picnic baskets, bring binoculars to come see this battle. We heard in one of the clips we watched from the Civil War documentary by Ken Burns that some of these soldiers actually recognized their congressman and said, oh, this will be great. They'll get to see us whip the Rebs. So people really thought that this was going to be over and done with quite quickly. One major outcome of this battle is Stonewall Jackson. He was under fire, and he was resolute in holding this one particular hill. And someone said, look at Jackson, they're standing like a stone wall. So he does get that moniker. But with this battle, it is quite shocking to many people to realize that this isn't just for fun, that these men die, and it's not going to be a short war. It won't be over by Christmas, as many people speculated. For the North, Lincoln decides to put George McClellan in charge, realizing that the Union Army is really unorganized, needs discipline. So McClellan is going to be the man to do that. And we saw a video about how he started training them. He started running drills. He wants them to be a professional army. But one major problem was he didn't really act on going into battle. So the next major battle, Shiloh, doesn't take place until the following year. We have Major General Ulysses S. Grant is a major player at this battle. This is April 1862. Now, if you remember in Lincoln's inaugural address, he said that this war would only happen if the South acted first. But now that the South has acted, the Union is not going to sit back and take it easy. The Union Army, you can see, goes into Tennessee here at Shiloh, and the Union Army has 40,000 men. Confederates have 30,000 men. In total, there are 23,000 casualties. That is huge. This was an incredibly bloody battle. Now, Sherman, who had another important military figure from the Union, is William Tecumseh Sherman. He was so overconfident in his position and the ability of his troops, and his troops end up getting sort of really obliterated. So we see that overconfidence does not work. But for the South, they realize that the North isn't going to sit back, that they will bring the fight to the South. And that is actually quite shocking for the Confederacy to realize. Then we have the Battle of Hampton Roads, better known as the Monitor versus the Merrimack. This is also in 1862, better known maybe as just the Ironclads. The Monitor was the name of a Union vessel, but it happened to be stationed in the South, so it actually became the CSS, the Confederate ship Virginia. So maybe it'd be better called the Virginia versus the Merrimack. But as you can see in this picture, these boats are essentially underwater. Once this battle happens, major changes happen to all of the world navies. And this is going to sort of foreshadow the U-boats and the submarines that we are so familiar with in the 20th century. Then we have Second Bull Run, or Second Manassas, same location, but just about a year later in August of 1862. This is the first major battle where Robert E. Lee gets involved. It is a Confederate victory, and for the South, this does give them a huge boost of morale. It does really show that in Virginia, or at least in Northern Virginia, the North is not doing well. It probably isn't worth their time, their effort, and their manpower to continue trying to fight these battles in Northern Virginia. The thing, though, is when Robert E. Lee at the Battle of Second Bull Run, he is not willing to just win the battle. He wants to chase the Union out. He chases them over the state lines to Antietam. Antietam is just over the border into Maryland. Lee has sort of this proud Virginian, sort of as, get out and stay out to the Union Army. He is also hoping by doing this that Marylanders will be convinced to secede. This doesn't ultimately happen, probably because of the major outcome of this battle. It is the bloodiest battle of the entire war. It was really quite shocking to those who were there that war was going to be this intense. Technically, we would consider this a tie, but Lee retreats first. So in that sense, you could kind of look at it as a Union victory, but in terms of casualties, tactical advantages, it is a tie. However, because of the perception that the Union is at least maybe not winning as much as they would like, but they are holding their own, President Lincoln decides to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. So he has been all about preserving the Union. But Lincoln recognizes that he cannot ignore the issue of slavery. So he says that as of January 1st, slaves will be considered freed. And this really, he is hoping to maintain support in the North and to get the support of the slaves in the South, possibly who might revolt and benefit the efforts of the Union Army. After Antietam, when Lee retreats, now the Union Army chases Lee back into Fredericksburg. This is in sort of north-central Virginia. This is December of 1862. And the Union general at this time is General Ambrose Burnside. Now, he would like to continue pursuing the army into Richmond. He ideally would like to take over Richmond because that is the capital. And one basic premise of war is that if you can capture the capital city, you have essentially won. The problem is Lee holds the high ground. By holding the high ground, he has the tactical advantage, and the Union experiences extreme casualties. They have twice as many soldiers, and they have twice as many casualties. For the Confederates, this is a major morale boost. They are encouraged to continue fighting. They believe they are in the right, and that they have the ability to win this war after a year and a half of fighting.